Number 1. Michael Slager. On the morning of April 4th, 2015, a 23-year-old barber named Faden Santana was walking to his job in North Charleston when he heard the sound of a taser being deployed nearby. He walked toward it and saw a white police officer and a black man struggling on the ground. He took out his phone and started recording. What he captured in the next 3 minutes would result in a murder charge, a federal conviction, and a 20-year prison sentence for the officer on that video. But Santana told no one. For 3 days, he sat on the footage, afraid of what might happen if he came forward. For 3 days, only one version of events existed, the version told by Michael Slager. It looked nothing like what was on that tape. Walter Scott was 50 years old. He was a father of 4, a former U.S. Coast Guard serviceman, and a forklift operator who spent the better part of his adult life struggling to stay current on child support payments he could not consistently afford. He has been to jail over it 3 times. By the spring of 2015, he owed approximately $18,000, and Charleston County Family Court had an active bench warrant out for his arrest. His brother Rodney said Walter had told him exactly what he planned to do if police ever stopped him while that warrant was outstanding. He said he was not going back to jail over child support, and if police ever stopped him, he would run. On the morning of April 4th, he drove his Mercedes down Remount Road in North Charleston. Officer Michael Slager pulled him over for a broken taillight. When Slager returned to his patrol car to run the plates, Scott got out of his car and ran. Slager chased Scott on foot and deployed his taser during the pursuit. Scott fell to the ground. As Slager caught up to him, he pressed the taser directly against Scott's body and delivered what officers call a dry stun, a contact shock intended to gain control of a suspect. The 2 men struggled on the ground for several seconds. Then Scott broke free. He got back to his feet and started running again. By the time Faden Santana pulled out his phone and began recording, Scott was already fleeing across a vacant lot, with Slager running behind him. With Scott at least 17 feet away, Slager raised his weapon and fired 8 times. 5 bullets struck him in the back. A 6th grazed his ear. He fell to the ground in that vacant lot and died there. Then Slager walked back across the lot to where the struggle had taken place. He picked up his taser from the ground. He walked back to Scott's body, and he placed the taser down next to the dying man. Then he picked up his radio. "Shots fired," he said. "Subject is down. He took my taser." That was the story Slager gave to every officer who responded. He told 2 lieutenants and the police chief that during the scuffle, Scott grabbed his taser and pointed it at him. He told investigators he feared for his life. He said he fired until the threat was stopped. It was a clean account, consistent across every report filed that morning. It was the kind of statement that ends an investigation before it starts. Nobody knew Faden Santana had been standing in that lot recording the whole thing. Santana went home that day with the footage on his phone and sat with it for 3 days. He later said he knew what he had the moment Slager fired. He also said he considered deleting it because he was afraid of what coming forward might mean for him. In the end, he chose not to. On Sunday, April 5th, he contacted Scott's family and told them what he had. On Monday, April 6th, he handed the footage to the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. That same day, Slager was arrested and charged with murder. His attorney withdrew from the case shortly after the video became public. On April 8th, Michael Slager was fired. The murder trial began in November 2016 in Charleston County. Slager took the stand in his own defense. He described the struggle on the ground. He said Scott had taken his taser, and he saw it coming at him. He maintained he fired in self-defense. Prosecutors showed the jury the video. They showed the distance, 17 feet of open ground between Slager and a running unarmed man. They showed Slager walking back to pick up the taser and dropping it next to Scott's body. They pointed out that Slager had called in on the radio immediately after the shooting, already constructing the story he would tell before any investigators arrived. When asked why he dropped the taser next to Scott's body, Slager could not give a clear answer. In December 2016, after days of deliberation, the judge declared a mistrial. The jury was deadlocked. They could not reach a unanimous verdict. The state prepared to retry Slager on murder charges, while federal prosecutors built a case of their own. Facing the prospect of 2 trials, Slager made a decision. On May 2nd, 2017, he pleaded guilty in federal court to violating Walter Scott's civil rights. As part of the plea deal, the state of South Carolina agreed to drop the murder charge and not refile. Slager was remanded to custody and held pending sentencing. While awaiting his sentence, he was housed in a cell block next to Dylan Roof, the young man sentenced to death for the 2015 Charleston church massacre that had killed 9 people in the same city that same year. The federal sentencing hearing began December 4, 2017, before Judge David Norton. Fayden Santana took the stand. He said what he had always said. He never saw Scott try to grab the taser in the open field. Scott was trying to get away. The federal sentencing guidelines recommended between 10 and nearly 13 years. Slager's attorneys asked for less. Judge David Norton rejected that request. The judge ruled that what Slager had done amounted to second-degree murder. He sentenced him to 20 years in federal prison. Meanwhile, Walter Scott's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of North Charleston. The city later agreed to a $6.5 million settlement. Michael Slager remains in federal prison, serving that 20-year sentence. As of now, he is not expected to be eligible for release until the mid-2030s. Number 2. Kim Potter. In law enforcement, the difference between a taser and a Glock is unmistakable. One weighs less than a pound, the other more than 2. One is yellow, the other black. One sits on the left side of the duty belt, the other on the right. Every officer who has ever worn a badge knows this distinction by heart. On April 11, 2021, Kim Potter, a 26-year veteran of the Brooklyn Center Police Department and a certified field training officer, drew one in place of the other. It was a Sunday in Minnesota. Dante Wright, 20 years old, was driving through Brooklyn Center when officers pulled him over for an air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. He was already on the phone with his mother when the lights came on behind him. He told her what was happening and she told him to take the air freshener down. She offered to speak to the officers herself, to help sort out the insurance paperwork just to get her son home safe. What happened next never gave her a chance to say a single word to them. Dante Wright grew up in the Minneapolis area. By the age of 20, he already had several encounters with law enforcement. In June of 2020, Minneapolis police stopped Dante during a separate incident. He fled from officers and was later found carrying a firearm without a permit. Prosecutors charged him, but he failed to appear in court. That missed court date resulted in an outstanding gross misdemeanor warrant that remained active on April 11, 2021. It was that warrant that turned a routine traffic stop into an arrest attempt, and an arrest attempt into the final minutes of his life. Dante had no idea any of that was coming when he got in his car that Sunday. During the stop, officers ran Dante's information, and the warrant came back. They ordered him out of the vehicle. Then, as officers moved to handcuff him, he pulled away and got back into the driver's seat. Kim Potter rushed to the driver's side window. She announced she was going to use her taser and reached for it, but what came up in her hand was her Glock. She yelled taser 3 times and fired 1 shot. Dante was struck in the chest. His car rolled away from the scene and crashed several blocks later. He died there. Kim dropped to the pavement after realizing what had just happened. With her body camera still running, she said, "Holy shit, I just shot him. I grabbed the wrong gun." What the body camera showed, and what a jury would later watch in a Minneapolis courtroom, was that Kim held the Glock in her hand for 5 full seconds before she fired. 5 seconds of yelling taser while holding a black 2-pound handgun, instead of the yellow half-pound stun gun still sitting untouched on her left side. A State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension agent testified to every physical difference between the 2 weapons. The taser was yellow, the Glock was black. The taser weighed 0.94 pounds. The Glock weighed 2.11 pounds. The taser holster released with a lever. The gun holster released with a snap. They were holstered on opposite sides of her body and felt completely different in the hand. Prosecutors also pointed to Kim's taser training and daily equipment checks. Brooklyn Center officers were required to perform a function test on their taser at the start of every shift. An audit of Kim's records showed she completed that test on only 6 of her previous 10 shifts. The last documented test occurred 2 days before the shooting. Kim had been taser certified since 2002, meaning she had 19 years of training. She had carried both weapons on that same duty belt for years. She knew the difference. She had just never confused them before. Brooklyn Center Police Chief Tim Gannon held a press conference the following day and said he believed Potter had intended to deploy her taser and accidentally fired her firearm instead. He called it an accidental discharge. 2 days later, he resigned. Kim resigned the same day Gannon did. She did not wait to be fired. Her resignation did little to calm the situation. Protests erupted across Brooklyn Center that same week. The timing only intensified the reaction. Minneapolis was just 9 days away from the verdict in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin, the former police officer convicted of killing George Floyd. Then Daunte Wright was killed. His death came at one of the most tense moments the city had faced in years, and immediately became part of a much larger national conversation about policing and use of force. Kim was arrested on April 14th and charged with second-degree manslaughter. She was released on bond, and the charge was later upgraded to include first-degree manslaughter as well. Jury selection began November 30th, 2021, in Hennepin County District Court before Judge Regina Chu. The prosecution's case was built around a simple argument. Potter was a 26-year veteran and a certified field training officer. She has been trained on tasers for 19 years. She knew the difference between her two weapons better than almost anyone in that department. The confusion she described was not a reasonable mistake. It was the product of recklessness and culpable negligence. A man was dead because she failed to do what her decades of training required her to do. The defense argued that, in a chaotic, high-stress moment during a legitimate arrest attempt, Kim's muscle memory failed her. She genuinely believed she was reaching for her taser, and by doing so, she was protecting her fellow officers from a car that could have dragged one of them away. She did not intend to kill Daunte Wright. During cross-examination, prosecutor Aaron Eldridge walked Potter through every difference between her taser and her Glock. She showed Potter photographs of both weapons and asked her to confirm they looked different. The jury deliberated for approximately 27 hours across 4 days. On December 23, 2021, the jury returned its verdict, guilty of first-degree and second-degree manslaughter. Sentencing took place on February 18, 2022, before Judge Regina Chu. Judge Chu sentenced Potter to 2 years in prison and a $1,000 fine, plus 2 years of supervised release and 200 hours of community service. In June of 2022, the city of Brooklyn Center reached a $3.25 million civil settlement with Daunte's family. The settlement also included reforms to Brooklyn Center police policies around traffic stops. Potter served 16 months of her 2-year sentence, as required under Minnesota law. On April 24, 2023, she was released from the Shakopee facility at approximately 4 in the morning. The Minnesota Department of Corrections said the early hour was chosen out of an abundance of caution, citing security concerns. She was placed on supervised release and moved to Wisconsin to serve the remaining 8 months. Her supervised release ended December 21, 2023. She is no longer on supervision. She is no longer a police officer. Today, at 53 years old, she lives in Wisconsin. Number 3. Erin Dean. It's 2:30 in the morning in Fort Worth, Texas. Inside a house on East Allen Avenue, a young woman and her 8-year-old nephew are still awake, playing video games. The front door is open, not because anything is wrong. They burned their food earlier and left it open to clear the smoke. At some point that night, a neighbor notices the open door and calls the police non-emergency line for a welfare check. 2 officers respond. One of them walks around the side of the house, enters the backyard without knocking or identifying himself as police. He approaches a rear window, shines a flashlight through the glass, and fires a single shot. The woman at that window was 28-year-old Tatiana Jefferson. She was a biology graduate with plans to go to medical school. She carried a gun to the window because she heard someone moving around in the backyard and wanted to protect the child behind her. She was right about that part. The officer who shot her had been on the force for less than a year. His name was Erin Dean. Dean and his partner, Officer Carol Darch, arrived on East Allen Avenue just after 2:30 in the morning on October 12, 2019. They looked through the storm door at the front of the house and saw no one. Dean did not knock. He did not call out. He walked around the side of the building, pushed through a gate into the fenced backyard, and moved through it in the dark. Inside, Tatiana heard the noise. Someone was outside her window. She reached into her purse, pulled out a handgun, and went to the rear bedroom window to look out. Her nephew Zion, 8 years old, was behind her. As Dean reached the window, he shone his flashlight through the glass and saw a figure inside. He raised his weapon and told the person inside to put their hands up. 1 second later, he fired. A single bullet passed through the closed glass window and struck Tatiana Jefferson. She died in that room, with Zion standing behind her. Dean later testified that he saw a green laser aimed toward him and a firearm in her hand before he pulled the trigger. But the body camera footage told a different story about the sequence. On the recording, there is no moment, not before the command, not during it, where Dean identifies himself as a police officer. The command and the gunshot came almost simultaneously. Prosecutors would later argue that Tatiana had no time to process what was happening, let alone comply. 2 days after the shooting, Fort Worth Police Chief Ed Krause held a press conference and said something sitting police chiefs almost never say. He apologized. He said the shooting was inexcusable. He said that if Dean had not already resigned, he would have fired him for violating the department's use of force policy, its de-escalation policy, and basic conduct standards. Dean submitted his resignation before the department could act. He was arrested the same day on a murder charge and released on a $200,000 bond. What investigators uncovered in the weeks that followed only deepened the controversy. Before Dean ever put on a uniform, a psychologist evaluated him for the Fort Worth Police Department and concluded he was narcissistic and not psychologically fit for the job. He failed the evaluation and appealed. The department hired him anyway. His early performance reviews flagged tunnel vision, poor communication, and a habit of being evasive when confronted about mistakes. He was on the force for less than 12 months when he responded to the call on East Allen Avenue. In a 2017 job interview, when asked about the use of deadly force, Dean said it would be no problem. On December 20th, 2019, a Tarrant County grand jury indicted Dean on a murder charge. Then the case stalled for nearly 3 years. The pandemic, the death of Dean's lead attorney, and a series of legal delays slowed the proceedings. Throughout it all, Dean remained free on bond. The trial finally began on December 5th, 2022. Prosecutors told the jury that Dean did not see Jefferson's gun before he fired, that he raised his weapon and pulled the trigger before he could have assessed what was in her hand, and that the command he gave came too fast for any living person to obey. The defense argued that Dean saw an armed silhouette with what appeared to be a laser pointed at him and responded the way his training required. Dean took the stand on day 4. He cried when he described the shot. He cried again when he described walking into the house and seeing a child in the room beside the woman he killed. The jury deliberated for 13 hours. On December 15th, 2022, the jury returned its verdict. Aaron Dean was not convicted of murder. Instead, jurors found him guilty of manslaughter. 5 days later, after another 13 hours of deliberation, they handed down a sentence of 11 years, 10 months, and 12 days in prison. Dean was taken from the courtroom directly into custody. He appealed, but the Texas Second Court of Appeals upheld the conviction. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals declined to review it. On October 7th, 2024, the United States Supreme Court refused to hear the case. No justices dissented. His sentence stands. Tatiana's family said they never received an apology from Aaron Dean. Not after the arrest, not after the verdict, not after the sentence. He is currently in a Texas state prison. The stretch of road in front of the house on East Allen Avenue is now called the Tatiana Jefferson Memorial Parkway. Number 4. Amber Geiger. Botham Jean and Amber Geiger lived in the same apartment building for 2 months without ever speaking to each other. He lived on the 4th floor. She lived directly below him on the 3rd. They shared the same building, the same parking garage, and for weeks their paths never crossed. On September 6th, 2018, that changed. After a 13.5-hour shift, Amber Geiger drove home and parked on the wrong level of the garage. She then walked to the wrong apartment door. Because the units looked nearly identical, She did not realize she was standing outside someone else's apartment. The door was unlocked. Believing she had entered her own apartment and that someone had broken in, Amber stepped inside. She saw a figure in the living room and fired twice. The man she shot was Botham Jean. He was 26 years old, unarmed, and sitting in his own apartment eating ice cream. Within seconds, he was mortally wounded by a neighbor he had never met, who lived one floor below him and mistakenly believed he was an intruder in her home. Amber was still in her police uniform when she fired. She had spent the last part of her shift helping a SWAT team arrest 3 robbery suspects, and she came home the same way she arrived at every scene, armed, in uniform, and apparently running on instinct. Outside Botham's door was a bright red doormat, the only one like it on either the 3rd or 4th floor of the building. She later said she didn't see it. Her key also failed to open the lock, another sign that she was at the wrong apartment. She missed that too. The door was already slightly ajar because a warped strike plate sometimes prevented it from latching shut automatically. She pushed it open and went in. Botham Jean was a 26-year-old accountant from the island of St. Lucia, 2 years into a job at PwC. He just returned from a quick errand. After walking into his apartment, he left the door unlocked, settled onto the couch, and opened a bowl of ice cream while watching television. Amber later said she saw a large figure in the darkness and believed he was moving toward her. She told him to show his hands. Moments later, she fired. But forensic analysis of the bullet's trajectory painted a different picture. Investigators concluded that Botham was seated, not advancing toward Amber, when the bullet struck him. After firing, Geiger stepped back into the hallway and looked around. For the first time, she realized she was not in her own apartment. She called 911, but before she did, she texted her police partner, the same officer she had spoken with just minutes earlier. "I need you," she wrote. Then another message followed. "I messed up." When responding officers arrived, Geiger's keys were still in Botham Jean's door. 3 days after the shooting, Amber was arrested and charged with manslaughter. The charge was later upgraded to murder. The Dallas Police Department fired her 18 days after Botham's death. The trial began in September 2019. Prosecutors argued that even if Amber genuinely believed she was inside her own apartment, the shooting was not justified. As a trained police officer, they said, she had other options. She could have backed away, closed the door, and called for backup. Instead, she entered the apartment, confronted the person inside, and opened fire. The prosecution's case was simple. Regardless of whose apartment she thought it was, Amber made a series of decisions that ended with an unarmed man dead in his own home. The defense argued that Amber genuinely believed she was in her own apartment and that Botham Jean was an intruder. Everything that happened afterward, they said, stemmed from that mistake. In their view, the shooting was not murder. It was a tragic error caused by a mistaken belief about where she was and who she was facing. Amber took the stand and cried through most of her testimony. She said she was scared. She said she was sorry. She said she wished he had been the one with the gun who killed her instead. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. On October 1st, 2019, they came back, guilty of murder. The jury sentenced her to 10 years. She appealed. The Texas Fifth Court of Appeals upheld the conviction in August 2021. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals declined to review it in March 2022. On September 29, 2024, what would have been Botham Jean's 33rd birthday, Amber Geiger became eligible for parole. Prosecutors opposed her release. More than 6,000 people signed a petition asking the parole board to keep her behind bars. 11 days later, on October 10th, the board denied parole. On November 20th, after a 3-day civil trial that Amber did not attend and for which she had no legal representation, a federal jury deliberated for roughly 3 hours before ordering her to pay Botham Jean's family $98.6 million. Jurors concluded that she used excessive force when she shot him. Her former criminal defense lawyer later told reporters that she could not afford an attorney. As of the time of this video, Amber Geiger remains in a Texas state prison. Her next parole review is scheduled for October 2026. Number 5. Roy Oliver. At approximately 11 p.m. on April 29, 2017, Balch Springs police officers Roy Oliver and Tyler Gross responded to a 911 call about a noise disturbance and possible underage drinking at a house party. They entered the home and found nothing. No drugs, no alcohol. Then, they heard gunshots from outside. The shots came from more than a block away. They had nothing to do with the party or anyone in it. Oliver ran to his patrol car and grabbed his rifle. And what he did with it next would make him the first police officer convicted of murder in Dallas County in over 40 years. Jordan Edwards was 15 years old on the night of April 29, 2017. He was a freshman at Mesquite High School in nearby Mesquite, Texas. He arrived at the party that night with his brothers, Vidal and Kevin, along with 2 friends, 5 black teenagers in total. When police arrived and everyone scattered, they got into a Chevrolet Impala and started heading home. They never talked about what was happening outside. Like everyone else in the area, they heard the distant gunshots. Then they left. As the Impala started to pull away, Officer Gross ran toward it, yelling for the driver to stop. He reached the car and smashed one of its windows with his handgun. One of Jordan's brothers later testified that he heard shouting but could not make out who was yelling or what they were saying. The car did not stop. Then Oliver raised his rifle and fired 5 shots into the moving vehicle. One of the bullets struck Jordan Edwards in the back of the head as he sat in the front passenger seat. Jordan was 15 years old, unarmed, and had done nothing wrong. The car came to a stop, and Jordan collapsed in his seat. His brothers, who had witnessed the shooting from inside the same vehicle, rushed him to a hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The Balch Springs Police Department released its first statement the following morning. According to police, the car was moving aggressively toward officers when Oliver opened fire. That was the justification. By the next day, Police Chief Jonathan Haber had watched the body camera footage. Then he called a press conference. He said he misspoke. The car was driving away from the officers, not toward them. The footage showed it plainly. Oliver fired into a vehicle that was driving away, carrying 5 teenagers who were not armed, not threatening anyone, and not doing anything except trying to leave. Oliver was fired from the Balch Springs Police Department on May 2nd, 2017, 3 days after the shooting. 3 days later, after a Dallas County arrest warrant was issued charging him with murder, he turned himself in and posted $300,000 bail. The murder trial began August 17, 2018, in Dallas County's Frank Crowley Courts building before Judge Brandon Birmingham. The prosecution's case rested heavily on the body camera footage. Jurors also heard testimony from Tyler Gross, Oliver's own partner, and the officer who was closer to the car than Oliver when the shooting occurred. Gross testified that he did not fear for his life, did not believe deadly force was necessary, and never fired a shot. Oliver took the stand in his own defense. He told the jury he fired because he believed the car was moving toward Gross and his partner was in danger. He said he didn't know there were teenagers in the vehicle. The prosecution also called rebuttal witnesses to testify about a separate incident involving Oliver and a civilian woman named Monique Arredondo. After Monique rear-ended his personal vehicle in a traffic collision, Oliver pointed a gun directly at her face. A passenger who witnessed the encounter described him as angry and enraged, while an assistant district attorney who happened to be there characterized his demeanor as hostile, quite hostile. Prosecutors argued that the incident revealed a broader pattern in Oliver's conduct rather than a single lapse in judgment. The jury deliberated for approximately 15 hours. On August 28, 2018, the jury found him guilty of murder. It was the first murder conviction of an on-duty police officer in Dallas County in more than 40 years. Sentencing took place the following day. Prosecutors asked for a minimum of 60 years. Oliver's mother, Linda, took the stand and asked for 5. She said her young grandson needed his father. The jury deliberated into the night and sentenced Roy Oliver to 15 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Jordan's family believed the sentence was too lenient. Oliver, meanwhile, fought to overturn it. In August 2020, the 5th District Court of Appeals in Dallas upheld his conviction and sentence. A year later, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals declined to review the case. With that, the conviction became final. In April 2023, a federal civil jury found that Oliver used excessive force and acted with malice. They awarded Jordan's estate and his father, Odell, $21.6 million, $10.6 million in compensatory damages, and $11 million in punitive damages. The jury also found Oliver was not entitled to qualified immunity. Roy Oliver is currently serving a 15-year prison sentence in a Texas state facility. He became eligible for parole on February 12, 2026, but was denied release in March. His next parole review is scheduled for 2027. Number 6. Jason Van Dyke. On the night of October 20th, 2014, Jason Van Dyke stepped out of his patrol vehicle on South Pulaski Road in Chicago. 6 seconds later, he opened fire. He fired 16 shots. After emptying his magazine, he started to reload until his partner ordered him to stop. For 13 months, the mayor and the state's attorney fought in court to make sure nobody ever saw the video of what happened that night. The story starts on the night of October 20th, with a 17-year-old boy running erratically down the middle of South Pulaski Road, carrying a 3-inch folding knife. His name was Laquan McDonald. He was born on Chicago's West Side on September 25, 1997, to a teenage mother who could not care for him. By the age of 3, he was already in the custody of the state of Illinois. He spent the next 14 years moving between foster homes and relatives. Along the way, he experienced neglect and abuse, and repeatedly cycled through juvenile detention for petty crimes and drug-related offenses. By the summer of 2014, his life seemed to be moving in a different direction. Following the death of his great-grandmother earlier that year, the woman who raised him for most of his childhood, he moved in with his uncle and enrolled at Sullivan House, an alternative school on Chicago's southwest side. According to Principal Thomas Gattuso, he never missed a day. He was outgoing, talkative, and quick to make people laugh. He talked about playing basketball and was making a genuine effort to turn his life around. 2 months later, he would be dead. Shortly before 10 p.m. on October 20th, Chicago police received a 911 call reporting that a teenager was breaking into vehicles in a trucking yard in the Archer Heights neighborhood of the city's southwest side. Officers responded and found Laquan McDonald. He was carrying a 3-inch folding knife. He used the knife to slash a tire on a police car and scratch at the windshield of another. Officers attempted to contain him with their vehicles and called for backup, specifically requesting officers equipped with tasers. They kept their distance as McDonald walked along South Pulaski Road. For several minutes, roughly 10 officers surrounded him without firing a shot, choosing instead to wait for additional resources to arrive. Then Jason Van Dyke arrived. Van Dyke was 36 years old and a 14-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department. He and his partner heard the call on the radio and responded. They pulled up on South Pulaski Road approximately 10 minutes after the initial 911 call. Van Dyke stepped out of his vehicle. Within 6 seconds, he opened fire. The dashcam footage shows what happened. McDonald is walking down the middle of the road, veering slightly to the side, moving away from the officers, when the first shot hits him. He spins and collapses onto the pavement. Van Dyke keeps firing. 7 more bullets strike McDonald as he lies on the pavement. Puffs of dust rise from the asphalt where rounds miss and hit the ground around him. Van Dyke fired 16 shots in approximately 15 seconds, emptying his entire magazine and beginning to reload before his partner stepped in and told him to stop. Laquan McDonald died at the scene. He was 17 years old. The police reports filed that night told a different story. Officers wrote that McDonald had lunged at Van Dyke and posed an imminent threat. Sergeant Stephen Franco signed off on reports stating McDonald attempted to stab Van Dyke and actually injured him. Neither of those things was true. None of the reports reflected what the dashcam footage showed. The dashcam footage was downloaded and given to investigators within 24 hours of the shooting. Van Dyke was placed on desk duty and remained on the Chicago Police Department payroll. In March 2015, attorneys representing McDonald's family sent a letter to the city warning that the dashcam video contradicted every police account of the shooting and that at least one witness had been intimidated. On April 13, 2015, without public discussion, without a lawsuit having been filed, without any charges having been brought against anyone, the Chicago City Council voted unanimously to pay McDonald's mother $5 million. The settlement came with a condition: the dashcam video would not be released. A freelance journalist named Brandon Smith filed a Freedom of Information Act request to force the video's release. When the city denied it, he filed a lawsuit. Mayor Rahm Emanuel and Cook County State's Attorney Anita Alvarez spent months fighting that lawsuit in court, arguing the video's release would compromise the integrity of the investigation. On November 19, 2015, Cook County Judge Franklin Valderrama ordered the city to release the footage. Hours before the video was made public, Alvarez charged Van Dyke with first-degree murder. On November 24, 2015, the dashcam footage was released publicly. Police Chief Gary McCarthy was fired by Mayor Emanuel on December 1st. 3 officers, former Officer Joseph Walsh, Officer Thomas Gaffney, and former Detective David March, were charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy for allegedly filing false reports to protect Van Dyke. In a bench trial in January 2019, a judge found all 3 not guilty. The Chicago Police Board fired 4 officers for their roles in the cover-up: Sergeant Franco and Officers Mondragon, Viramontes, and Sebastian. Jason Van Dyke's murder trial began in September 2018 in Cook County Circuit Court before Judge Vincent Gaughan. He was charged with first-degree murder, 16 counts of aggravated battery, and official misconduct. Van Dyke took the stand in his own defense. He testified that McDonald was advancing toward him with the knife raised. He said McDonald's eyes were bugging out of his head. He said he repeatedly commanded McDonald to drop the knife and that McDonald ignored every command. When prosecutors pointed to the dashcam footage showing something different, Van Dyke told the jury, "The video doesn't show my perspective." On October 5, 2018, the jury returned its verdict: not guilty of official misconduct, guilty of all 16 counts of aggravated battery with a firearm, and guilty of murder, not first degree, but second degree. Van Dyke was the first Chicago police officer convicted of murder for an on-duty shooting in approximately 50 years. His bond was revoked. He was taken into custody immediately. Sentencing took place on January 18, 2019, before Judge Gaughan. Prosecutors asked for between 18 and 20 years. Van Dyke's attorneys asked for probation. Judge Gaughan sentenced him to 81 months. That's 6 years and 9 months in prison. Van Dyke resigned from the Chicago Police Department in October 2019, facing decertification and imminent termination. The Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board already revoked his certification to serve as a law enforcement officer in the state. He can never be a police officer in Illinois again. On February 3, 2022, Jason Van Dyke was released from prison after serving just over 3 years, less than half of his 81-month sentence. His early release was tied to good behavior credit. He is currently a free man. Number 7. Mohammed Noor. At 11:27 p.m. on July 15, 2017, Justine Damon called 911 from her home in southwest Minneapolis to report that she could hear what sounded like a woman being attacked in the alley behind her house. 22 minutes later, she was dead in that same alley. It started with a woman's voice coming from the alley. It sounded like someone was being sexually assaulted. She had called her fiancé first. She told him she could hear a woman screaming in the alley behind their home in the Fulton neighborhood of southwest Minneapolis. He told her to call the police. She did. But after 8 minutes passed and no officers arrived, she called again to make sure help was on the way. Then she called Don back one last time to let him know the police were there. Then she hung up. 1 minute and 19 seconds later, she was holding a gunshot wound to her abdomen. Justine Damon was 40 years old. Originally trained as a veterinarian, she later became a life coach and yoga instructor, helping others find peace and meaning in their lives. She moved to Minneapolis from Sydney, Australia several years earlier to be with Don Damon, a casino executive she fell in love with and agreed to marry. The wedding was planned for August 2017 in Hawaii, 1 month away. She already went by his last name professionally. In every way that mattered, she was already Justine Damon. After hearing the scream and calling 911, Justine waited for police to arrive. At 11:41 p.m., officers Mohammed Noor and Matthew Harity drove their squad car south down the alley behind her home. Neither officer activated a body camera, and the squad car's dash cam captured none of what followed. For the moments that mattered most, there was no video. only the accounts of the two officers who were there. The squad car rolled slowly down the dark alley when a sudden loud bang came from near the driver's side of the vehicle. The sound startled Harity, who immediately reached for his weapon. In the passenger seat, Noor looked up and saw a woman at the driver's side window. She was barefoot, wearing a pink shirt with blonde hair. As she approached the vehicle, she raised her right arm. Noor immediately fired a single shot across his partner and through the driver's side window. The bullet struck Justine Damond in the abdomen. She only came outside to help officers locate the source of the screams she reported. Before she could say a word, she was shot. At 11:51 p.m., Justine Damond was pronounced dead in the same alley she had called police about just 22 minutes earlier. Noor never identified himself, never gave a warning, and never spoke to her before firing. For hours after the shooting, officers at the scene did not know that the woman lying dead in the alley was the same woman who had made the 911 call. A sergeant walked to the edge of the scene, found the number for the original caller in the dispatch records, and called it. The call went to voicemail. Don Damond was in Las Vegas when investigators reached him. The first call told him Justine was dead. The second call told him the person who shot her was a police officer. He said the first thing he asked was for them to treat her body with dignity. Mohammed Noor refused to speak to investigators after the shooting. He did not make a single public statement about what happened in that alley for nearly 2 years. He was charged with second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter in March 2018. He turned himself in after the warrant was issued. He was fired from the Minneapolis Police Department after being charged. The trial began in April 2019 in Hennepin County District Court. Noor's first public words about the shooting came when he took the stand. He testified that he was born in Somalia in 1985 in a small town 75 miles from Mogadishu. He grew up on a corn farm. He came to America, worked in property management, and made a mid-career decision to become a police officer because he wanted to serve his community. He said he had wanted to be the best officer he could be. He testified that on the night of the shooting, he heard the loud bang, saw his partner's face fill with fear, watched Harity struggle to draw his weapon, and then saw a figure appear at the window with an arm raised. He said he fired to stop the threat. His partner painted a different picture of the moments before the shooting. Under questioning, Harity acknowledged that he feared they might be walking into an ambush, yet Harity never fired his weapon. He said he did not believe it was necessary. The jury deliberated for roughly 10 hours before reaching a verdict. On April 30th, 2019, they found Mohammed Noor guilty of third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. He was acquitted of the more serious charge of second-degree murder. Noor was the first Minnesota police officer ever convicted of murder in an on-duty killing. Sentencing took place on June 7th, 2019, before Judge Catherine Quaintance. She sentenced Noor to 12.5 years in prison. 3 days later, the city of Minneapolis announced it had reached a $20 million settlement with Damond's family. The settlement required the family to donate $2 million to a local gun violence fund. Damond's father filed a separate $50 million civil lawsuit accusing Noor and Harity of conspiring to conceal the facts of the shooting by failing to activate their body cameras. Noor appealed his conviction, but in February 2021, the Minnesota Court of Appeals affirmed the third-degree murder verdict. His attorneys then turned to the Minnesota Supreme Court in a final effort to overturn it. In September 2021, the Supreme Court overturned the third-degree murder conviction. The justices ruled that the depraved mind murder statute cannot apply when a defendant's actions are directed at a specific person. They vacated Noor's conviction and sentence and sent the case back for resentencing. On October 21st, 2021, Judge Quaintance resentenced Noor to 57 months, that's 4 years and 9 months, on the second-degree manslaughter charge alone. On June 27, 2022, just days before the 5th anniversary of Justine Damond's death, Mohammed Noor was released from a North Dakota prison and placed on supervised release. In total, he served approximately 3 years behind bars. Noor remained under supervision until January 24, 2024. Today, having completed his sentence, he is a free man. Number 8. Numan Raja. Before Numan Raja went out on duty on the night of October 17, 2015, His supervisor gave him specific instructions. Wear your tactical vest, the one with the police markings on it. Raja did not wear it. He drove out in an unmarked white van with no police decals and no emergency lights, dressed in a t-shirt, jeans, and a baseball cap. He was doing plainclothes surveillance for auto burglaries in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. At 3 in the morning, he spotted what he thought was an abandoned vehicle on an Interstate 95 exit ramp. He drove the wrong way up the ramp and stepped out. The vehicle was not abandoned. Corey Jones was inside it, waiting for a tow truck. Neither man knew what the other was thinking, and only one of them would walk away alive. Corey Jones grew up in the church. His grandfather, Bishop Sylvester Banks Sr., preached at Bible Church of God in Boynton Beach, Florida, and from the time Jones was 4 years old, he sat in that building watching his uncles play drums, until one day he climbed behind the kid himself and never really stopped. On the Saturday night before he died, he performed with his reggae band, Future Presidents, at a bar in Jupiter, Florida. While driving home south on Interstate 95, his SUV broke down on the exit ramp at PGA Boulevard in Palm Beach Gardens. He called his bandmate Matthew Huntsberger, who came to help and added oil to the engine, but the vehicle still would not run. After calling for a tow truck, Matthew left, and Jones remained alone on the dark ramp waiting for help. Jones called his brother to let him know what had happened. His brother offered to come pick him up, but Jones said no. He needed the SUV for church the next morning and didn't want to leave it stranded on the side of the highway. While waiting for the tow truck, he called AT&T's roadside assistance line and was placed on hold. 3 days earlier, Jones legally purchased a .380 caliber handgun and carried it under a valid concealed weapons permit. The firearm was with him that night. At 3:15 in the morning, he sat alone in his disabled SUV on the exit ramp, still on hold with roadside assistance, when Newman Raja pulled up. Raja was a 7-year police veteran who was transferred to the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department in April 2015, 6 months before the shooting. He was still in his probationary period with the department and was also an adjunct instructor at Palm Beach State College's Police Academy, where he taught part-time. On the night of October 17th, Raja was assigned to a plainclothes unit investigating a string of auto burglaries in the area. His supervisor told him to wear his tactical vest, the one that identified him as law enforcement. He did not. He took his personal unmarked white van with tinted windows, no police decals, no emergency lights, and no markings of any kind, and drove out in civilian clothes. When he spotted Jones's SUV alone on the exit ramp, he assumed it was abandoned. He drove his van the wrong way up the ramp and pulled in at an angle in front of the vehicle, blocking it. He got out of his vehicle and approached the SUV in the darkness without displaying a badge or identifying himself as a police officer. Jones was still on hold with the roadside assistance line when Raja approached his window. What neither man knew was that the AT&T line was still recording. The hold music had stopped, and the dispatcher was connected. Everything that happened on that ramp in the next 60 seconds was captured on audio. On the recording, Raja approached the vehicle and asked Jones if he was okay. Jones said he was. Raja asked again, then a third time. Prosecutors would later argue that his tone sounded sarcastic and confrontational, not like that of an officer making contact with a stranded motorist. Jones again replied that he was fine. Raja then shouted at Jones to raise his hands. Jones told him to hold on. Seconds later, Raja fired 3 shots. After a pause of roughly 10 seconds, he fired 3 more. In total, Raja fired 6 rounds. 3 struck Corey Jones, including one that entered his side and tore through his aorta. Despite his injuries, Jones managed to get out of the SUV and run before collapsing approximately 200 feet away. His gun was 125 feet from his body. The safety was still on. He had never fired it. Raja used his personal cell phone to call 911. On the call, Raja can be heard shouting orders to drop the gun. Prosecutors later argued he was performing for the recording, trying to make it appear as if Jones still had the weapon when in fact Jones was already dead and the gun was on the ground. When investigators arrived, Raja gave his version of events. He claimed that he identified himself as a police officer, that Jones pointed a gun at him, and that he fired in self-defense. It was a clean story, and it might have held, except that Raja did not know the AT&T line had been recording everything. The recording said he never identified himself, that his tone was not that of an officer making contact, and that his account of the 911 call did not match what was captured on audio. A 60-page report by State Attorney's Office investigators reached a blunt conclusion: Raja lied. The report also concluded that Raja approached Jones's vehicle in what investigators described as a tactically unsound, unsafe, and grossly negligent manner. Raja was placed on administrative leave with pay immediately after the shooting. On November 11, 2015, the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department terminated his employment. On June 1, 2016, a Palm Beach County grand jury indicted Raja on 2 charges: manslaughter by culpable negligence and attempted first-degree murder with a firearm. He was arrested and charged. He was held without bond initially, then placed on house arrest, where he would remain for the next 3 years while his case moved through the courts. The trial began February 26, 2019, at the Palm Beach County Courthouse in West Palm Beach before Judge Joseph Marks. It was the first time in 26 to 30 years that a Florida police officer had stood trial for an on-duty killing. On the first day of testimony, prosecutors played the AT&T roadside assistance audio for the courtroom. Raja's defense team argued that Jones pointed his gun at Raja without warning, creating genuine fear for his life. They said the discrepancies between Raja's sworn statement and the audio recording were not lies. They were the product of stress and memory distortion after a traumatic event. On March 7, 2019, the jury convicted Raja on both counts: manslaughter by culpable negligence and attempted first-degree murder with a firearm. Sentencing took place on April 25, 2019. Prosecutors and Jones's family asked for the maximum, 30 years. Judge Marks imposed 25 to run concurrently on both counts. In April 2021, a Florida appeals court rejected Raja's appeal. He continues serving his 25-year sentence. In February 2023, more than 7 years after Jones's death, the city of Palm Beach Gardens settled the family's civil lawsuit for $2 million. Number 9. Robert Olson. 26-year-old Anthony Hill stopped taking his medication because of the side effects. He was a 26-year-old veteran who had served in Afghanistan, and the drugs prescribed to treat his bipolar disorder were making it impossible for him to function. He believed he would see his VA doctor within the week. He never made it to that appointment. Within days, he was in a mental health crisis in the parking lot of his apartment complex in Chamblee, Georgia, naked and disoriented. His neighbors called 911 for help. A police officer named Robert Olson arrived. He was carrying a gun, a taser, pepper spray, and a baton. The weapon Robert Olson reached for was not what a man with PTSD and bipolar disorder needed. That decision is what destroyed him. Anthony Hill served in the United States Air Force and was deployed to Kandahar Airfield in Afghanistan in September 2010, one of the most frequently attacked bases in the country, a place where suicide bombers and rocket strikes were a regular part of life. He came home in 2011. 2 years later, the Air Force medically retired him. His cousin, Kaylin Alexander, later recalled that Anthony returned home, talking about children he had seen killed. He came back, carrying memories he could not explain and experiences he could not leave behind. When Air Force officials screened Anthony for PTSD after his return, he denied being wounded or witnessing casualties. Based on those responses, physicians concluded that he did not meet the criteria for the disorder. In hindsight, that assessment would come under serious scrutiny. By August 2011, 5 months after leaving Afghanistan, Anthony was reporting to an Air Force nurse practitioner that he was anxious, depressed, and isolating from others. Not long after, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He was prescribed several medications including Seroquel, a drug that often left him oversleeping and frequently late for his duties at Moody Air Force Base. As doctors tried to find the right combination of drugs to stabilize him, Anthony missed more and more work. His commander eventually wrote a recommendation that he be separated from the service. Effective June 28, 2013, Anthony Hill was medically retired from the United States Air Force. He moved to the Atlanta area. He settled at the Heights at Chamblee apartment complex in Chamblee, Georgia, a suburb just north of the city. He was trying to rebuild. He was managing his diagnosis. He was taking his medication and seeing his doctors and working to stay stable. In March 2015, Anthony stopped taking his medication after developing muscular side effects he could no longer tolerate. His girlfriend, Bridget Anderson, later said he expected to see his VA doctor within the week and believed the problem would soon be resolved. He never made it to that appointment. On the afternoon of March 9th, 2015, the manager and assistant manager of the Heights at Chamblee apartment complex spotted Anthony through the window of the leasing office. He was outside in the parking lot, naked, wandering and knocking on doors. The manager called 911 so officers could come check on him. It wasn't because she feared him. She knew Anthony, and she knew something was wrong. The man standing in front of her was not acting like himself. She wanted someone to help him. Officer Robert Olson responded to the call. Olson was 52 years old and a 7-year veteran of the DeKalb County Police Department. Before becoming a police officer, Olson spent years working for the United States Department of Agriculture. His record as an officer was solid. Performance reviews were consistently favorable. He had never discharged his weapon on duty. He arrived at the Heights at Chamblee and stopped his squad car in the parking lot. Anthony was a good distance away, naked, in a crouching position. When Anthony saw the police car, he stood up and began running toward it. Olson stepped out of his vehicle. He drew his weapon and ordered him to stop twice, but Anthony kept running. Then Olson fired twice. Both shots struck Anthony in the chest and in the neck. Anthony fell to the ground before he reached Olson. He never made physical contact. He never touched the officer. He was found on the ground several feet short of where Olson was standing. Anthony died in that parking lot. The officer who shot him had a taser, pepper spray, and a baton available. He used none of them. When the second officer, Lynn Anderson, arrived on scene, he found Olson standing in the parking lot. Olson's gloved hands were drenched in blood. Olson told Anderson that Anthony had been pounding on him before he fired. That was not true. The evidence would show that Anthony never reached Olson. He fell short. He never made contact. He never pounded on anyone. That lie became one of the central allegations against Olson, and the officer who heard it did something rarely seen in law enforcement. Officer Lynn Anderson took the stand at Olson's murder trial and told jurors what Olson said to him that afternoon. Reporters covering the case described the moment as a breach of the blue wall of silence, the unwritten code that discourages officers from reporting misconduct by fellow police officers. Anderson was the second officer to testify against Olson. His testimony marked the final witness presentation in the prosecution's case. The DeKalb County Internal Review Board already found that Olson used excessive force against Hill. Olson resigned from the DeKalb County Police Department in 2016 after a grand jury indicted him. The murder trial began in September 2019 in DeKalb County Superior Court before Judge Letitia Deere Jackson. It was more than 4 years after the shooting. Olson faced 6 charges: 2 counts of felony murder, aggravated assault, making a false statement, and 2 counts of violation of oath of office. He pleaded not guilty and claimed self-defense. The jury deliberated for 6 days. It was a long and difficult process. At one point, the jury was reportedly evenly split on whether it was self-defense or murder. On October 14th, 2019, they returned a verdict. Not guilty of felony murder, but they found him guilty of aggravated assault, 2 counts of violating his oath of office, and making a false statement. Sentencing took place on November 1st, 2019. Prosecutors sought 25 years to serve. The defense asked for 5. Judge Jackson sentenced Olson to 20 years total, with 12 to serve in prison. She also permanently banned him from working in law enforcement, from possessing any firearm, and from profiting in any way from the events of March 9th. Robert Olson was taken into custody. In March 2024, nearly 5 years into his sentence, the Georgia Court of Appeals overturned Olson's convictions for aggravated assault and violation of oath of office. The court ruled that the trial judge improperly allowed the DeKalb County Police Department's use of force policy to be presented as evidence. According to the appellate court, portions of the policy conflicted with Georgia's self-defense law and may have misled the jury. The DeKalb County District Attorney asked the Georgia Supreme Court to review the Court of Appeals decision, but the state's highest court declined to hear the case. As a result, Olson was released on bond. One conviction, however, remained intact. Olson never appealed his conviction for making a false statement, along with the accompanying sentence of 5 years probation, and that judgment stood. In May 2025, more than 10 years after Anthony Hill's death, Robert Olson entered a negotiated guilty plea to aggravated assault. He received a 15-year sentence with 12 years to serve, but the court credited him with time served and ordered his immediate release. After roughly 5 years in prison, Olson walked free. Number 10. Stephen Rankin. Before Stephen Rankin ever fired his weapon in the line of duty, a former colleague described him as a man who was afraid of his own shadow. Before his first fatal shooting, senior commanders put their concerns in writing, warning his lieutenant that Stephen was dangerous and likely to get someone hurt. Nothing was done. In 2011, Stephen shot and killed an unarmed man named Kirill Denyakin. A grand jury declined to indict him, and the department returned him to patrol. 4 years later, Stephen responded to a shoplifting call at a Walmart in Portsmouth, Virginia. The suspect was 18-year-old William Chapman. He was unarmed. The warnings had been there all along. No one listened, and by the time they were proven right, it was too late to save him. Stephen Rankin joined the Portsmouth Police Department after leaving the United States Navy in 2007. He was trained military, and by the time he put on a police uniform, he had the kind of background the department considered an asset. His evaluations were not the problem. The problem was everything that came with them. Before his first fatal shooting, a former colleague later told investigators that Rankin was afraid of his own shadow, a troubling description for an armed police officer. Senior commanders were even more direct. They warned his lieutenant that Stephen's behavior on the job made him dangerous and that he was likely to hurt someone. The warning was there before anyone died. On the evening of April 23, 2011, Stephen Rankin responded to a disturbance call in Portsmouth. A man was outside an apartment, pounding on the glass door and trying to get inside. What Stephen did not know, and what no one was able to quickly explain because of a language barrier, was that the man was Kirill Denyakin, a 26-year-old immigrant from Kazakhstan staying at the apartment with friends. Earlier that night, Denyakin got drunk and urinated on the floor. His friend's wife told him to leave. At some point, he fell asleep outside. When he woke up, he started banging on the door, trying to get back inside. Stephen Rankin arrived and found Denyakin at the door. According to Stephen, Denyakin suddenly charged at him and refused repeated commands to remove his hand from his pants. Stephen opened fire, then he fired again and again. By the time it was over, he had shot Kirill Denyakin 11 times. He died before paramedics arrived. Stephen forgot to wear the belt microphone connected to his patrol car's dash cam. There was no audio. There was no video. There was only Stephen's account. In February 2012, the grand jury declined to indict him. For 3 years, Stephen remained on desk duty while the courts examined the shooting. Denyakin's family sued. A civil jury found Stephen not culpable. The federal appeals court upheld that decision. With the legal battle finally over, the department made its choice. In March 2014, Stephen returned to full patrol duty. What nobody knew at the time was that Stephen spent those years posting hundreds of anonymous comments on local news stories defending his own actions in the Denyakin case. On the morning of April 22, 2015, a Walmart security guard named Gregory Provo called Portsmouth police to report a suspected shoplifter leaving the store. The call was assigned to Stephen Rankin. Stephen arrived at the Walmart on Portsmouth Boulevard and saw 18-year-old William Chapman walking through the parking lot. He notified dispatch that he was approaching, then moved in to stop him. What happened next became the central dispute in the case. Stephen said a struggle broke out. He deployed his taser. He said Chapman knocked the taser out of his hand. He said Chapman then stepped back toward him. Then he fired twice. One bullet struck William Chapman in the face. The other struck him in the chest. Chapman was pronounced dead at the scene. His body was removed from the parking lot with his hands cuffed behind his back. His pockets were turned inside out. There was no weapon on him. Stephen described a close physical struggle, but a medical examiner found no gunshot residue, indicating a close-range discharge, meaning Chapman was shot from several feet away. A crane driver working nearby said he saw Chapman act aggressively and charge at the officer before being shot. His account supported Rankin's version. Then Gregory Provo later testified that Chapman never charged. He said Chapman stood approximately 6 feet away from Stephen, with his hands raised in a boxing stance. He said Chapman looked at Stephen and said, "Are you going to fucking shoot me?" Then Stephen shot him. Stephen was indicted by a grand jury on September 3, 2015 for first-degree murder and use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. He was fired from the Portsmouth Police Department the same day. He turned himself in, was processed, and was released on $75,000 bond. Stephen's trial began in the summer of 2016 in Portsmouth Circuit Court. He pleaded not guilty and maintained that he acted in self-defense. Prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder, a charge that required them to prove the shooting was premeditated. The defense told jurors a different story. They argued Stephen had only seconds to make a decision after losing control of his taser and genuinely believed William Chapman posed a threat. On August 4, 2016, the jury reached its decision. They rejected the first-degree murder charge. The prosecution had not convinced them the shooting was premeditated, but Stephen was not acquitted. The jury found him guilty of voluntary manslaughter. In October 2016, Stephen was sentenced to 30 months in prison. It was the jury's recommended sentence. The city of Portsmouth reached a $1 million civil settlement with Chapman's family. Family spokesman Earl Lewis Jr. told reporters it was not about the money. Stephen Rankin served 2.5 years. He is currently a free man. In each case, a decision made in seconds changed lives forever. Every person in this video mattered. They were sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, people with plans, families, and futures. And these cases proved that even when justice is delayed, accountability is still possible. If one of these stories stayed with you, let me know which one in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.